start, huh? Ready? Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Spokane County Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, December the 12th, 9 a.m. Thank you for being here. Public may participate in person or remotely by utilizing our web link and telephone conference link *9 to raise hand and *6 to speak. Individuals are limited to 1 3-minute comment period for any item. Please keep your comments specific to the current agenda item. Chat is not supported. Our first normal procedure is to introduce ourselves. To my right,
Lonnie Edwards. Wayne Brokaw.
Clyde Haase.
Pete Rayner.
Stephen Pohl. First, the next item is what we call the open forum. This is part of the agenda where we allow the public comment to talk about any item that is not on this agenda today, which has been published. Would anybody like to address the commission at this point? Is this your yellow slip right here? Welcome. You're Thomas Soldner?
Tom Soldner, that's right.
Great to have you here, Tom.
Good to be here. I hope to be seeing you more over the next year and a half. I live in Valley Ford, toward the west end of Valley Ford, and I work with the executive committee of the Upper Columbia River Group of Sierra Club, and am involved with the Inland Northwest, Trails and Conservation Coalition, I think. And my interest is in the comprehensive planning process. I wanted to be here also to experience the charrette that is on the agenda. Unfortunately, I have another appointment this morning, and I hope I'll still be here when that happens. So I have to leave around 11 o'clock. So I look forward to seeing more of you and to working with people on the staff and appointments that are working with the comprehensive plan for 2026.
You come to the right spot.
I hope so. Interested in open space, wildlife conservation, and climate. Those are the foci that I will be keeping in mind for my work. So thank you very much. Thank you for the work that you do. I look forward to working with you.
Thanks for being here. And we don't expect to go past 11, so I think you'll be in good shape.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next order of business is FAC 03-24 Farm and Ag Conservation for parcel 36122.9024. Owner Joseph M. Zastra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick comment on our first guest. We have established, as we've told you, and we will go into that a little bit later as we move on, the technical advisory committees, one which is for environmental open space things. So we will invite our guests to participate directly in that, which will have an ongoing role in assessing, evaluating, bringing in people such as him as subject matter experts and interested parties that will provide guidance for staff recommendations ultimately, but that you will be deliberating on. So we welcome his participation. Those, as he noted, those are not trivial elements for what we're doing over this next 20 to 40 year horizon for planning. Yes, that said, we have a similar issue before you today. Robert Brock, one of our planners, is managing this, and I will have him walk you through it.
Hello, Robert.
Good morning, everyone. Will this advance? Or are you doing it? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get right to it. How's everyone this morning? It's been a while since we've been up here with one of these. So anyway, let's get to it. So this particular property is located in the northern portion of the county up on the Peone Prairie. And it's approximately, well, it's located on the east side of a private road named Nelson Lane. And it's about a quarter mile north of the Peone Road. And it's zoned small tract ag, sort of located in the center of a small tract ag zone. And the small tract ag zone is a zone that is characterized as having good soils and suitable for small scale agricultural activities. The proposal here is that the owner would like to get into the farm and ag conservation category. They're formerly in the ag category. When they bought the property, they had a sort of a handshake agreement with a local farmer to hay the property. And something happened and the actions it wasn't happening. And so they got removed from the program, or they got a removal notice. And when you get a removal notice, when you're in the ag program, your choice is to either pay those 7 years of back taxes or get into another program. And this particular owner has decided that they in fact do want to farm the property. They have planted it in alfalfa, and they have signed into this program and produced a farm plan. And so that's basically the substance of this application. They intend to produce alfalfa. The planning department has taken a look at this particular application, and they have we've looked at the eligibility, and the basic eligibility for being in the farm and ag conservation program is that it's either previously been farmed or you are in the ag category. And this particular one met the basic criteria because it was in ag. The priority considerations in this case are they have produced a farm plan. They've identified alfalfa or hay as their future crop they're going to produce. And we've looked at the land, and the current use of the property appears to be consistent with future agricultural uses. Under additional consideration, we looked at the zoning, and the zoning is appropriate for this type of use, being that it is an agricultural zone. It's located outside the urban growth boundary. The applicant, as part of their farm plan, has developed a noxious weed program. We looked at this property for impediments to farming, and we did not identify any. And when we ran it through the public benefit rating form, this particular property scored 165 points. Now, 150, I believe, is the cutoff for getting the maximum possible deferral. And that maximum possible deferral is 50% on the land only. So that means if you had a property that was worth, say, $140,000 just on the land, the current use taxation might drop it down to 70,000. The structures on the property would be taxed at the full market rate. So we've proposed some conditions of approval for this, and they are fairly standard, and the most consequential of which is the annual reporting clause, in which the applicants are required to report to the assessor who administers these programs after they pass through the legislative process. They are required to make a report every January indicating how they have implemented their farm plan. So with that, I'll take any questions on this application.
Seeing none. No discussion. All right. Well, before us is the reclassification. Chair will entertain a motion to, no, we want to do one more thing?
Chairman, this is a public hearing. This requires a public hearing. You should open the hearing for public comment before you deliberate.
Oh, yes. So, thank you very much, Scott. So without the commission is now open, or we will now open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience would like to come and speak for or against? Now would be the time to do that. Anybody online? No one online? No comments?
I'd make a motion that we close public testimony.
Without objection, public testimony is closed. Now we're ready for the vote.
You are free to deliberate
All right.
or make a motion to recommend this to the Board of County Commissioners.
Anything, anybody want to say anything about no?
Staff's presentation seemed thorough and I'm ready to make a motion to recommend. I don't have the numbers, but
Thank you, Logan.
yeah.
This is Logan Camporeale. He's just joined us, but thank you for being here. Thank you. Second.
I'll second.
Second, Wayne Brokaw. Thank you very much. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same side, by saying nay. Approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Workshop.
Well, let's move on to the comprehensive plan. This is a chance for us to share with you some progress that we have made over these past few months. We've given you a couple of briefings earlier in the year, and notably what we're headed for is, or hoping for, is a discussion, questions, comments, thoughts from each of you about these various topics that will help us shape how we create and move forward in our assessments and evaluations into 2025. Much of what's happened in this past year has been, I would say, somewhat behind the scenes in terms of getting ready for our more outward-facing role in 2025. What we're going to go through is a sense of where those various elements are and the idea of how we're going to move the specific GMA functions of this forward, which are the critical foundation before we get to what we described with you last time, the placemaking scenario building aspects. So you can see a key roster of the various GMA required elements on the left. Staff has been assigned to those, as you can see on the right. And staff in this last year, 15 months or so since they've joined us, have become near subject matter experts in these fields. So we are in very good shape to be moving forward with our consulting team and our staff. The consulting team has 4 key firms to it. 3 of them are working under the Facet umbrella as our general consultant for the comprehensive plan update. Kimley Horn will be working on the EIS and some transportation analysis. Makers all of these are off the West Coast. They will be primarily focused on the core of the plan, which is placemaking, scenario building, and the change in modification of development regs to make those things happen. And then Cascadia will be overseeing the climate and resiliency element specifically. And as we've previewed with you before, Cascadia was under contract with Commerce directly to help Commerce create the climate and resiliency rules for GMA. So we're fortunate to have them on our team, and also because of our collaboration with the city, they are the city's consultant for climate and resiliency. So this is one of those elements where we will be very, very closely integrating our work with the city of Spokane. The key elements coming up are going to involve everything on how we start to interact with the public to provide you with comments from the public, from experts, and also engage you in some of these workshops. We've got some coming up. You can see where we've been here, the kickoff forums we had earlier this year. And then we're working on a series of efforts through Tom MacArthur, our comms liaison, who is going to be leading our public participation effort as we move forward. And we're excited about broadening this now that we've got most of these pieces in place. You can see the first bullet under future engagement is we've identified 9 planning charrettes, and we're going to do 3. It's a sequence of 3 in 3 separate areas. One will be generally West Plains based. One will be generally kind of northeast in the Meade area, which are 2 of our faster growing areas to begin looking at how we implement new changes. And the third will be in the East Valley, recognizing the unique needs of the City of the Valley's growth edges as well as Liberty Lake. Those will engage in a first session will be a little bit of, here's what a charrette is, here's what placemaking is all about, here's visioning, and here are some basic ideas on what we think is a consideration for how to plan new growth and how to plan infill growth for our existing urban growth areas. At that session, we will take comments from them. What do you like? What's a challenge? What other things do you have involved? We will then take that information back with our consultants, work that through the black box, and bring out a series of alternatives and recommendations into the second meeting to say, here's some ideas based on what we heard last time from you and from others in around the country that work in this kind of, or are trying to do this kind of planning effort. Refine those in that second session. Again, go back to the consulting team, go back to the drawing board, refine that back down to a recommended scenario and bring that back in a third meeting. That will happen over generally the first half of 25. And what that does is it provides then a solid foundation. If we can describe the picture of what it is we want to see in our new development and our infill filling in the rest of our urban growth areas, then we can start to plan for that, and planning in terms of time, intensity, capital facilities, all of the other necessary elements. So we've got that three-part sequence in 3 of our key areas. Those involve all 5 of our commissioner districts. And so the commissioners will be asked how they wish to participate. We would expect they would be, if nothing else, masters of ceremony at some of these events. And we will be inviting all of you to those as well. 5 of you represent individual commissioner districts, 2 of you are at large. However, your responsibilities are in fact county-wide. So as we send these invitations and notices out, any and all of you are welcome to participate in any of these. This sequence of 9 will all be in person because it's very important that we're able to have that open house effect, be able to talk to folks and get that information directly. So much, we've said before, so much of our work is driving online and digital, which gives a whole nother meaning of being able to participate for those that can't or are unable to make it to a physical event. But these first 9, we think, are very important to be face-to-face with constituents.
They're all here?
No, they will be out in the field. They will. We're focusing on using library facilities because most people either know of them or know how to get there. They have meeting facilities and they are generally available to us. We did that with those kickoff sessions for the most part. So these we will take out. This will be on the roadshow. We will have boards. We will have digital images. We will have literally paper on the walls that we can start drawing on and get ideas for. And so these will be very interactive, very hands-on. Wayne. Oh, yes. You're getting a little ahead of me, but thank you. One of the things that you will see at your January meeting is that calendar. It'll be for the first 2 quarters of 2025. We are going through now with our team to getting our consultants on board, making sure they're comfortable getting their schedule together since they're doing a lot of the background work and bringing that to us. Once we have that in place for your January meeting, we will publish that and then start, lining up those venues and sending out the invitations. And again, while these are in-person activities, they will also have a virtual component. So people can participate if they can't make it to a specific library facility. But yes, we will have that calendar for you at your January meeting. You can see the 4 other points under that future engagement heading really get into more of kind of the details of the elements. Climate and resiliency workshops. Again, as you've heard, the county has partnered with most of our smaller towns, particularly those on the Palouse. And the simple offer was practical. They're small towns. They don't have a lot of resources. They generally don't have planning staff. They have to either rely on consultants or other aspects. we offered them a chance to simply be part of the bigger team, and they've mostly agreed. So our consultants will be working and engaging with all of those community partners to work through a unified climate and resiliency element. The climate part makes sense that it's countywide anyway. You can't stop climate and issues on a municipal boundary. Resiliency is going to take some definition for each of those places. We will be, in one of the more obvious examples of that is emergency management, wildland urban interface issues resulting or recognizing what have we learned about the two big fires we had recently, and how does that speak to a resiliency element? What's the recommendation that we should have for our growth and development that provides some acknowledgement of the resiliency necessary to avoid natural disasters or other things. So those will have some unique components for each of those places specifically. As we said before, on-site and virtual workshops, that's going to be an ongoing thing. And one of the ways we're contemplating that is looking at this calendar and trying to highlight, for example, Wednesdays throughout the entire year as being days that we will do things with the public. Some will be these 9 sessions out in the world. Some will be virtual, but we're going to set those as dates because one, Thursdays will conflict with you and your sessions here. Tuesdays are often busy with our Board of County Commissioners. Wednesdays, while they do have steering committee dates, gives us a chance to block the calendar pretty much for the year and say, yeah, let's focus on this. And frankly, then it gives our public some confidence that, on any given Wednesday, there might be something happening related to this comprehensive plan. And then just generally getting the word out in the more traditional fashion. Tom is working with various venues to have, I don't know if we did kind of put it up here, virtual media, podcasts. We will be doing some things with traditional media, newspapers, television stations that are also speaking to the aspect as we move forward. And then most importantly, from our perspective, we've engaged a consultant to design a new web page that will go behind the front wall of the county's web page for building and planning. When you click the comprehensive plan button, it'll bring up a page that is entirely dedicated to the Comp Plan 46 effort. And that will be not just the library style that we have currently with our web page. That will be the interactive tool that people can respond to. We will have video. They can respond in comments and in video. It'll be a very robust tool for us to gather public comment over these next couple of years. And then lastly, in this case, we do have these specific technical advisory committees for many of these elements. And those are where we've invited subject matter experts, all volunteers, as well as interested parties to participate specifically in discussions for you can see a handful of them here: the natural environment and rural lands, transportation, housing, climate resiliency. You'll notice we don't have a land use TAC up there yet. We want to get through the first part of the year with some of these elements and some of these small or smaller parts, segments of the plan. And then we will start to synthesize that into a land use and transportation discussion starting kind of mid-second quarter of 2025. So the public participation program, which has grown from countywide planning policies that were amended in 2022, and the public participation program recommended by you and adopted by the board in 23, is now turning into that implementation side that we're charting this and being ready to hit the ground with our dog and our pony starting in 25. So happy to take any questions about public participation.
Are you anticipating evening or during the day meetings?
Both.
How large are the advisory committees? I see the little sort of 2-pagers on each committee, but I didn't see a size of membership, or is that just flexible?
It's very flexible. There's no limit. Well, there's a practical limit. If 50 people wanted to join, we'd have to get a bigger room, get a bigger boat. But for the most part, we're seeing a handful to a dozen or so interested parties. We are hosting them or facilitating them through in-person use of our planning studio, but also in the studio, we have virtual capabilities so they can sign in from other places. So as it is now, I think the most we have is about a dozen on one of these.
Thank you.
If we create more of a land use committee, I expect there will be even more widespread interest in that as we move forward, and we've got some slides to talk about that. So, other thoughts, comments, suggestions? You know, related to what Clyde just mentioned, you've heard from the public the desire to have something other than just a morning session of this group. We're recognizing that in this outreach effort so that we can have both daytime and at least early evening sessions to provide a chance for others to participate. Okay, let's move on. Into population. Here we're into now the guts of what we've talked about. You've seen some of these basic numbers before. We're bringing them back to you because they are our foundation. And what you can generally see is that, you know, where we were in 23 is that 550,000 population for the county, expected to grow by 100,000. We believe that is a low estimate. However, this is our planning estimate. And one important distinction we have is we're planning for this because it's a number sent to us by the Office of Financial Management. That is an accepted number by Commerce, but it's an accepted source of data from the GMA. And if we're using that, we're not setting ourselves up to be challenged for an unrealistic population projection because we do not have the demographic analysis capability to change that at this point. That said, we are going to be building in flexibility in our capacity, in our growth areas, and in our planning, so that if, as we believe, the county does grow faster than this, even if it's 1 or 2%, we have some ability to react to that faster than a 10-year update of the comprehensive plan, or more importantly, from our perspective, to not have to go through the comp plan amendment process that all of you have been through for these last 3 or 4 years, which is it's disjunctive. It really gets almost away from the idea of a comprehensive plan and more is reacting to simply development demand. We want to build a more reactive or a more flexible comprehensive plan that makes it more predictable for investment to be able to go somewhere over a 2 to 3 to 4 year period without having to guess if you're going to need some sort of amendment in the future. And all of that is, while that comp plan will have that capability, we are anticipating annual adjustments to our growth areas and others to accommodate this. And so that's where we're going to be able to be flexible and adapt. If we get a surge of growth in 27, we'll be able to handle that in 28. And then also the new rules for GMA, as we've said before, it used to be a 7-year. You had to update your comp plan every 7 years, just pretty an arbitrary number. It really makes no sense. Now it's a 10-year horizon with a 5-year intermediate kind of review chapter. That is a very good horizon because those of you in the development business know you can fairly carefully predict a market out about 3 years. And from that 3 to 5 year horizon, you get there as that first year starts to move on. You start to shape what's happening in year 4, year 5. We think that's a very reasonable approach to taking a broad look at the comp plan in that arena while having these annual adjustments going forward. Logan.
2 questions. One, why do we think, I assume we in this case means county planning staff, think that this $100,000 or 100,000 people estimate is low? 1. And 2, how does that flexibility work? Does the comp plan say something like, you know, at 35,000 broken down per annum is this much, but we've already seen a growth that exceeds that and somehow kicks in a clause that allows to go higher than that? How do you build the plan to be flexible in that sense, if that makes sense?
Sure. The reason we are optimistic that we will grow faster is really twofold. excuse me. OFM projections are historical trend lines. Nothing more than that. They are births and deaths, natural succession, plus in-migration, out-migration. That over a 20-year horizon is where they project Spokane going in the future. These are slightly higher than their projections from 2020 because the county did in fact grow faster in the last 5 years than was projected by OFM in 2015. We believe that trend is likely to continue for a couple of reasons. One, and the fact we're studying climate resiliency, we're simply kind of looking at the crystal ball and saying, this is an area that is remarkably free of natural disasters and natural constraints. You know, we're not in an earthquake zone. We're not in a tornado zone. We have generally mild winters compared to the Midwest. We have mild summers compared to the Southwest. If you were going and couple that, which is sort of a passive approach of saying, if you're moving to Phoenix or if you've lived in Phoenix for 10 years and now you've got 50% more 110-degree days than you did 2 years ago, are you going to want to stay there or are you going to want to find someplace else? We can't quantify that, but there's a sense that some of that is happening, partially because it happened during COVID. A lot of people moved during COVID because they could. And that's the second part of this, which is this comprehensive plan needs to be an economic development incentive plan. It needs to be something you read and go, they get it. That's where I want to be because they're setting themselves up for, if I invest here, I could be successful here. And so the plan has never been that before. It has simply been a GMA plan that said, here's residential and here's LDR, MDR, and zoning, here's industrial based on textbook of so many people. Okay, you're going to have this much jobs per person. We've never taken an active look and said, well, what do we want to be? What do we want to do? What do we want to attract here? And how do we write a plan that people in Denver, Minneapolis, Chicago, Salt Lake, Phoenix read and say, that sounds kind of good. So we're taking that more active approach. All of that said, Logan, it's a crystal ball. So we're sticking with what we can defend for now, but trying to build in that flexibility so that if our crystal ball proves fruitful, we've got the ability to react to that quickly. So did that help? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with most of those assumptions as well. But I was just curious what the assumptions were that made you think that, but I tend to agree with them. And yeah, I think having flexibility so that if we see that the situation is different, whether it's, either direction, to have some flexibility to adapt to that would be good.
So what this also generally shows is the breakdown between the UGAs and the cities. While the cities remain the largest places of population, of course, the city of Spokane itself, the urban growth areas are growing faster than the cities, and that falls into your responsibility.
I got a question.
Certainly.
Infrastructure services
Yes.
is critical
Yes.
to any expansion. How do we deal with that where certain parties have control and refuse to provide?
If they refuse to provide, Pete,
Yes.
we get a rope.
Get a
We just
what?
we just get a rope.
A rope.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm a very imaginative person, but I can't comprehend a rope that will last with that cow.
No, what we're doing, and we do have a discussion of capital facilities coming up in today's session. But generally speaking, one other thing we are doing in the background is reaching out to what are called the special districts, school districts, water districts, fire districts, because most of what happens on our responsibility in those urban growth areas involves districts other than the county. The West Plains, to be sure, the city of Spokane is the urban provider. DOT and SRTC cover transportation all over the place. But this group knows there's dozens of water districts that supply water to the metro area and the growth areas of the county, as well as a number of fire districts and the school districts especially. We have established the beginnings of a relationship with the school districts. We met with a group they call the superintendent's group. They meet quarterly. And we've got now kind of a standing agenda item to go before them. It's like, here's where the plan is going. What are you guys doing? How do we match this in some way? If you recall, 2 years ago or in 23, when we last did the comprehensive capital facilities plan amendment, we changed the concurrency requirements for school districts so that they're not so much commenting on comp plan amendments as they are having a chance to comment when a development plan and a building permit comes in. That gives them a stronger voice to say, you didn't tell us about this 400 unit thing that's going to drop on our doorstep, and we don't have capacity in the next 5 or 6 years to do that. That gives us then a chance to bring those parties together and say, you've got to solve this before you can get a building permit. And so that's kind of social infrastructure, pipes in the ground, inbound, outbound, transportation things. Because the county has now combined its capital facilities and CIP work with being able to support levels of service in the comprehensive plan, we can't plan for areas to expand unless we can demonstrate that there's a 6-year commitment for infrastructure to support that development. So we're building that in up front instead of okay, here's a plat, now who's going to put the pipes in?
Well, I think my question is more directed, and I know you know where I'm going with this, but if the provider of services simply says, we don't want to expand, and we as decision makers in the county
Yes.
want to develop that piece of property, what tools do we have to either replace their right to service it or require them to service it, or is that just out of the question?
No, it's not out of the question, and it sounds a little heavy-handed at this point, but we're working on what those tools might be. When a water district, for example, makes a commitment and draws a boundary and says, this is our service area. If we're planning for something to grow into that service area, we will talk to them because they have a presumptive commitment to serve. If they are unable to serve that because their water rights are insufficient or their distribution system is insufficient, then first off, they have to make that determination and perhaps de-annex that from their service area and let somebody else serve it, or they have to provide some other way of wheeling that water through somebody else's system through a pipe that they cooperate to bring it to that area. So we do have some broad tools to at least bring them to the table. We're exploring how much of that is a carrot, how much of that is a stick. We don't know yet.
One of the thoughts that come to mind is that when we went through this, a lot of us in this room remember, I don't know if you were involved with when the Meade built a school that ended up being outside the urban growth boundary and put in a septic system, and it created some problems, and I can't remember all the details. But are we going to be able to have standalone sewer systems that like we used to have, and
Under the current Growth Management Act, that's a very difficult challenge. Sewers are generally not allowed to be provided sewer service outside of an urban growth boundary, short of an a known and declared environmental emergency. Schools do have some special exemptions to that, but it's very difficult. Our goal, though, is for example, planning for the Meade area where they've got several of these schools that are outside of an urban growth area because there was never an urban growth area drawn. We're going to fix that in a sense by creating an urban growth area for that place. And that will, assuming that you agree and the Growth Management Board hearings board agrees, it will then provide a chance for a district, and in case of sewer, likely be the county, to provide that service within that new urban growth area to anyone that's there, and then focus that new urban growth area to grow more dense instead of continue to sprawl a little bit on the edges.
will that be required to be connected to like our county sewer system, or can, if the economics make sense, can they be standalone?
Don't know yet.
Okay,
We're
right.
frankly willing to entertain some innovative
Okay.
ideas to that.
Yeah.
Right now, the technology would suggest they would connect to the county's wastewater system.
Right.
And that would drain to one of the 2 wastewater treatment facilities that are available. However, there has been so much innovation in wastewater treatment technology in the last 20 years that we could see the package plant idea, for example, come to the fore that would still be fully compliant with the intent of the Growth Management Act, but wouldn't have to be a set of pipes that have to drain 12 miles to a treatment plant.
That's where I'm,
Yeah.
okay, that's good to know.
We're totally open to looking at that technology.
What about, handle 100,000 people possibly in this 1 year? What about looking at possible changes of going from like some R10s and being able to go to R5, or breaking some R20s down to some R5s?
We're going to be looking at that approach, and it comes into 2 factors, and when we'll get onto that here in just a couple slides, into the land capacity we have now using our existing rules of LDR, MDR, HDR. But also, our predecessors, when they did the 2001 plan, created a zone called the Urban Reserve, and that was on the edges of the growth management area. That was presumptively where they thought we would be growing when we ran out of room in this urban growth area. Those urban, we didn't bring a map, but I think we've shown that to you before. It's on our website. Those urban reserve areas are really very extensive, long extensive parts on the south part of the city of Spokane, south of Moran Prairie, going over to 195, going over to I-90 in the West Plains. 5 Mile Prairie is almost all designated urban reserve. Areas north of the valley, west of Argonne Road, have an extensive urban reserve zone in there. And so these were areas that our predecessors thought would be suitable for development in their case, 20, 30 years down the road. Those were generally supposed to stay at a minimum dwelling unit per acre size of 20. And the idea being you could have 1 dwelling unit per 20 acres, which would then make it feasible to develop that as urban densities at some point in the future. As some of those, when some of that urban reserve was created before the zoning changed. And so there's still 3 acre, 5 acre parcels in there. Those are going to be very hard to reassemble and develop in any kind of urban density. So you do have to kind of work around the practical parts of that. But the point of urban reserve was to preserve areas for future urban development by requiring big parcel sizes that could be further developed at some point in the future. We'll be very much looking at how that subdivision process plays out with this analysis. And right, there's urban reserve areas on that northwest side of the city of Spokane, going up, Indian Trail Road out toward the river. And so those are areas that will be prime candidates for the first cut of are these the areas into which we need to grow. So we'll be dealing with those. We'll get to some of that here in just a minute too in more detail. Just finishing up the population side of this. You have seen this matrix before. We wanted to put it up here mostly as a reminder. This was based on the mathematical models of growth based on your past trends over the last 10 years. In more recent conversations, we've had some, and the reason some of those are showing a 0 growth is the trend line showed those smaller communities shrinking. And so their trend line would have said you're going to shrink by another 10 or 20 people. We want to give all of our smaller places a chance to grow. So for the moment, we stuck them at 0, so they're not penalized by that. But we will be working with all of them. Medical Lake, for example, really wants to reinvigorate itself back to being a resort destination community. That's going to imply more than 0 growth. So we're kind of back to that argument we had with the OFM population numbers. These are defensible numbers based on past development trends, but we will be working with all of these small places to say, if you want to grow faster, if you want to have your own plan for development master planning that shows a more aggressive approach, we will support you. that in most of these cases, they probably don't need expanded urban growth areas. They've got areas within their boundaries that they can grow into. We will help them do that. But is that annual UGA adjustment, if they can document and justify and support through capital facilities, the need to grow into an area, that's where we can then help them grow. So take this as, again, as a foundation, as a starting point for growth over this next 5 years.
If I could, Scott, just a few of these, I know that I understand how the numbers are calculated, but a few of these jump out at me a little bit. To assume that Airway is going to grow by 50% again, and to assume that Liberty Lake is going to grow by greater than 50% again, seems bold to me. Maybe those are possible, and maybe there's space in those two places to do that, but it seems bold. And then also to assume that Waverly is going to grow by 11 and Spangle's not going to grow at all. And again, I know that's just taking the trend line and imparting
Right.
it on to the next 20 years. But again, seems to just not pass the sniff test, have you? Yeah, just some observations.
It's spot on. It's the difference between crystal ball planning and demographic analysis. If you're taking a trend line for a place like Liberty Lake that was created fairly recently and had a very, I don't want to say explosive growth, but had a high growth curve over the last 20 years, that trend is going to make it look like it's going to keep doing that. Where this gets immediately tempered is these are numbers given to those places to say, in your land capacity analysis, can you accommodate that number? And if Liberty Lake comes back and says no, then some share of that 8,700 population falls back into the county pool, because that's what we do. And so those are not necessarily numbers that say you will provide this amount of support. It's like, here's your allocation based on the rules. Now you tell us if you can accommodate that.
When is that phase when a jurisdiction has to say like, oh, we're not going to be able to do that, or actually we were hoping to do much more than that? When is that phase of this
Well,
process?
Logan, we started asking that question of the steering committee in 2021. And that was like, it's too early to think about it. And we 22, now we're not ready to think about it yet. In 23, we finally got everybody moving in this direction, because at that point, the legislature had set out the timelines for the comp plan and other things. They have made pretty significant progress in every case. And to be sure, the major players, the county, the city, the valley, are dominating the discussion just because they're the biggest places. We have asked all of these to come to the January steering committee meeting, January 15th, with their first draft of that land capacity analysis. How close can you meet this, and show us your work. You meet again on the 16th. We will have a summary for you of what the steering committee does the day before. The goal with that, though, is to have them share with us their work in progress in January, with the idea that the steering committee could hold a public hearing in March to, as much as you can nail Jello to a wall, to put those numbers up and say, all right, we're going to take public testimony. We're going to make a recommendation to the board that this is now our planning number. That gives everybody some certainty on starting to look then at that urban growth area, which is what we're going to get to here in a minute.
Scott, will we
Yes,
be
sir.
able then at the planning commission meeting in January at whatever date it is, will we be able to see that report from the general planning on the 16th then? In the
Yes.
meeting of the
In
15th?
fact, when it's posted for the steering committee, which will be a week ahead of time, it'll be on our web. We'll share that link with you so you can have a preview at that time.
So we'll be able to review that.
Yes. Yes. So here we go. The land capacity analysis. This is county only at this point. And it's, in one sense, the math here is deceptively simple. Look at the acreage you have in the various zoning classifications, add it up, multiply it by the expected development densities, and tell us what you can accommodate. So this is what we're showing for, and I say county only, meaning these are all the urban growth area by GMA includes the incorporated cities. This is the UGA that is only in the unincorporated county. Of that, we can show about 1,200 acres of currently vacant land in a residential category, and in our urban growth areas, that's almost always LDR. Partially used land are those that are small, are parcels that are fairly, well, and here's where we're debating. It's land that may have an occupied unit on it, but may be sufficiently large that could in fact subdivide into a higher density. We've seen more of that in the last 3 years than probably 10 or 20 years, maybe ever, from the city and even some in the county, because both the county board increased its density in the LDR before we started our conversation, from 6 units max to 8 max and 10 if you have some sort of duplex facilities in there. The city has been more aggressive, like cities around the country, and almost, and some of this has been the state too, acting as kind of a statewide planning commission, which is mildly annoying at times, but it provides direction. But saying every city that above a certain size, if you have low density zoning or single family zoning, you now must allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes on that zoning, and you could start subdividing those lot sizes. We've seen a couple of those, a project in the city on the South Hill on 37th Avenue, right at Hamblin School, essentially carved their backyard off, and now there's a 4-unit townhome going into that lot. So that's one suburban lot that became 5 homes. How widespread is that? That's what we're asking, in this case, the city to tell us. How much of this can you support? Back to Pete, part of it is the simple math. Here's the acreage. It could be developed in this way. Well, then now where's the reality check? First off, do you have the infrastructure to do it? If you subdivided every property on the lower South Hill that had a large backyard into a 4-unit townhouse, do you have the water and sewer capability to actually serve those? It's probably more likely in the newer areas of the cities than it is in the older historic districts north and south of the river that have pipes that date, to the 1800s. And while I think the city has finally replaced all of them, may still be wooden water mains in some of those areas. So we'll be looking at all of that. Platted land is exactly that. It's vacant, but it's already been platted. It has an approved plat of some kind. So in that case, we just count the lots and count the units. And then the capacity based on 2 things: the average density, unit density per acre development over this past 10 years. Graham on our side has been calculating that, and it comes out to like 4.46, 4.7 units an acre historically. So that's a defensible number. We can use units per acre. And then even though persons per household is a changing function, especially volatile since COVID, younger folks moving back in with parents, people taking less people in housing, for example, we can't quantify that. So we're using 2.5 persons per household for single family detached, 1.5 persons per household for multifamily, again, starting point. That leads to this 10,000 units and a 23,000 population capacity, again, in the simple math. And our allocation for the unincorporated UGAs is 30,500. So by this measure, we do not have sufficient land in the current UGA to handle our population growth. This is that preliminary analysis. The partially used land is likely going to change because we're continuing to refine that. Graham has found that somewhere between 18 and 20% of those smaller parcels redeveloped over the last 10 to 20 year period. Well, if that's the case, then 20% of that partially used land is a likely candidate to redevelop, which dramatically reduces the amount of capacity we can put into those. Is that 18 to 20% still valid? Or with this advent of COVID and other things, should that now be 25%? Well, okay, it's going to bump it up a little bit, but at some point we're noodling about handfuls or dozens of units when we really need to be talking about 20 and 30,000. So there's a degree of precision in here that is pretty much unwarranted, but we have to be able to document to you, to the commissioners, and to the state that we have used a methodology that is defensible, that says, yeah, this is our best guess based on what's happened, based on professional standards, based on best available patterns. So this is going to adjust itself a little bit.
God, I got one question.
Yes, sir.
I think you addressed physical capacity.
Yes.
And by that, I mean, is the pipe in front of the lot big enough to handle water or the sewer? One of the things that in the home builders we're discussing is fiscal capacity.
Mhm.
If you take GFCs at the rate they're going in the city, and you want to, I mean, I'm hearing numbers that to take a lot and make it into a fourplex, you're looking at up to $50,000 per lot, per unit. Well, where do we go with affordable housing? I
Right.
mean, how do we count those if we get so dang expensive that nobody can afford it?
Pete, that's a very good point. When we say that we have asked the cities to make this initial assessment, that stands because they are best positioned to do that. But we have said from the very beginning, we are going to check your work. And when we check their work, we're going to be looking at those very assumptions. It's, it's back to really 2001. And I don't want to put the city, our predecessors at the city in a particularly bad light, because the 2001 city plan was really innovative for its time. The centers and corridors was a terrific approach to focusing urban development. The city simply didn't go further. They didn't take the step of how do we actually implement this? How do we take this from a plan into something that we can share with developers and investors to say, here's what you do to achieve this thing. They have made more progress in the last couple of years to do that. And so they are really in a better position to try to have that infill density. Now, can they handle another 25,000 people within their borders? Now it's back to those questions. They may have the vacant land or the infill land to do it. Do they have the infrastructure? And I don't want to characterize it pejoratively, but what you're describing is also kind of the political will. And that political will is, do we have a $5,000 GFC? Or if this is infill, is that a public policy issue that's worth reducing that to a $1,000 GFC? Those are decisions that their legislative body will have to make. But we will be looking at that and go, you're building in a cost of development that we know is unreasonable because we've tested it with the investment community. So we'll be asking those very questions, and we'll be focusing that ourselves.
So our current capacity, based on all the factors that you mentioned, is about 20% lower than what the state has allocated. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is our starting point, yes.
Okay, and so one way to solve that problem, so to speak, or at least to meet the allocation that the state has provided, is to increase the density of those parcels by 20%, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The other option is to say, we have no desire to do that, kick these 7,000 people back to the city or to the other jurisdictions
Right.
to distribute. Is that also fair?
It is. Let me add your question. We are required under GMA to use our existing development regs to make these projections. So if our development densities in LDR are 2 to 6 or 2 to 8, we have to use that historical density to say, do we have enough land? So once that exercise is done, we check that box, we say, there's the report. Now we go back and say, okay, what's the plan going to look like in the future? How much of this is a good candidate for incentivizing a higher density product? And how does that then shape that ultimate UGA boundary, both today, or today being 26, and into the future? So there is an iterative process here. But the basic math starts with, you have to use your existing rules because those are the ones that are in law now. Otherwise, we're simply speculating, and that makes everybody nervous. So
I have a question. Have you predetermined the guidelines that you are going to be looking for answers from these jurisdictions, other jurisdictions, back to you to determine what the correct answer is? Or are we just I mean, I'm trying to understand how we evaluate
Sure.
the findings.
We haven't predetermined an answer, but we have given them the parameters by which we will check their work, which are the ones we've explained to you. Will your physical infrastructure support what you're doing? Physical being, not just water and sewer, but transportation infrastructure, multimodal infrastructure, all of those physical pieces. And then, as Pete brought up, are your development regs able to do this? And if they are, what are the costs of that actually happening? What are now these connection charges? What are the other subsequent things? So all of the communities know exactly how we will be evaluating their proposal. We don't have a predetermined outcome. If the city in making its development regs is now prepared to defend that, yeah, we can do this and here's why. And we look at that and go, yep, you nailed it, then they're fine. It's only that if we feel they've overreached, that we go back to them and say, well, you made this assumption. Here's the way we're reading it. Tell us how we're missing what you're trying to say. We're not going to hit anybody with a club, but we will challenge their assumptions.
Are you abiding by the guidelines set forth by the GMA in the correct evaluation? I mean, we're not in violation at that particular time when we get their answers?
Oh,
And
not at
we-
all. No.
So we have been satisfying the GMA, so we're not going to be fined again. Was that an open question?
Yeah, we have one pending case remaining from the 2013-2016 settlement agreement. We have cured all of the others and they have been withdrawn. Jessica is presenting that to the hearings board in getting her documents this month, making a presentation or a testimony in January, I believe. We expect a response from them in March. If they agree that we have cured what they found deficient in 2016, then Spokane County is back in compliance with the Growth Management Act. Nothing, and that's a parallel process. Nothing we're doing here is presumptively outside of GMA. We are asking questions precisely to stay within the boundaries of GMA so that we don't have an overreach of growth. And so where we would be in danger is if we had a series of unsupported assumptions, whether it's city or county, and we bring those to you and you make a recommendation to the board, and then someone appeals that to the hearings board and we can't defend those assumptions. Then we'll be right back in the hot water. My goal before I leave this profession is to have no more litigation against Spokane County. We are going to create a GMA compliant plan. Once we're back in compliance, however, we will challenge some potential details in GMA and say there's some other way of achieving the GMA objectives and goals and intentions without the same set of rules that apply everywhere, because this is a very different state economically, geographically, climate, everything else. So we feel the time is right for us to be able to create a GMA that is still within the intentions of the original 1990s version, but has a better chance of guiding development accurately in Spokane County and our environs.
Scott, how does the issues like the Latah Creek problems and the PFAS problems on the West Plains, I think those are involving at least partly areas that are inside the current UGA.
Right.
Do we take into account that they're not going to be able to solve the transportation problem at Latah Creek, or how does that play into this scenario?
The easy answer is yes. If our, and I don't necessarily mean our analysis from planning staff, but outside expert analysis on water and water quality, for example, come back and say that this is now an intractable problem and it's going to take a generation to fix, that's going to essentially put a development fence around some of that property and say this cannot support, because of capital facilities, because of water quality, because of environmental issues, this area cannot support development. However, if it can be fixed, then it fits into a CFP. Can it be fixed in 6 years? Can it be fixed in 20 years? Then we can adjust for that. But yes, we will take into account all of those constraints as much as we know and can guess. It's a little bit of Rumsfeld's old declaration. We've got known knowns, we've got known unknowns, but we also have the unknown unknowns. We can get up to that unknown part and guess at some of the known unknowns, but then that leads out to a public policy decision. Where is the risk level for you as public policy recommenders to the commission, and where's their comfort level at adopting something that has some level of risk into it as best as we can identify? We will obviously try to find the path of least resistance. Where do we grow the most economically that we can, that satisfies those needs? Because, you know, the easy answer for Spokane County is all the flat land is done. Everything else for development is going to be harder and more expensive. So how do we keep growing without making it unnecessarily expensive for development and for the resulting communities to maintain?
I appreciate you making the decision to be public about our current situation, just as the math shakes out now, but I'm curious if the city has shared their situation, at least even in generalities. Are they also in, I guess, below the allocation? Are they above the allocation? Is anybody above the allocation, or is every jurisdiction going to have to make changes to meet these allocations? I guess looking for a feel on that.
We haven't yet reached Lake Wobegon status where everybody's above average. The city has been very forthcoming. Their staff and our staff have worked very, very carefully together on discussions, on assumptions, on iteratively processing these numbers. We don't have an answer from them yet. We don't know if it's like, yes, no, maybe, but we do know the degree to which they are going through the analytical part, and they're being very thorough and very transparent with us. So we consider them, you know, valid partners in ultimately making this decision. I'm going to step aside for a moment. Graham is going to walk you through each of these UGA polygons and show you that kind of comparison that we had on the broad county as a whole. So you can kind of get a sense of the geography. As we talk about, the math is one part. We're pretty close on the math, and we'll be there in January. Translating math to geography is that next step from January kind of to May of next year. So I'm going to have Graham come up and take you through these, and then we will go through several of those other GMA elements before we wrap up for the day. And Mr. Chairman, if you want to take a break somewhere in between here, just give us a flag.
I'm sensing that.
You want to do it
Can we
now?
take a 5-minute break? 10 minutes, maybe?
Currently? Sure.
Right now.
All right.
All right. 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Graham. More time to. Planning Commission is now back in session. Graham, your turn.
Hello, commissioners. There we go.
Perfect.
Hello, commissioners. It's like Scott said before the break, my name is Graham Zickafoos. I'm an associate planner here at Spokane County, and I've been shepherding the land capacity analysis for the past several months. If we could just bring up the slides there. Yes, they're on. We'll start on that one. So I'm going to be moving through the next, I think it's 10 to 15 slides. I think it's 13 slides, relatively quickly, just because they just break down our vacant residential land capacity by UGA polygon. And so the each of these slides will contain kind of like this first slide suggests, the vacant land, the partially used land, the platted land capacity, along with the housing capacity and the population capacity for all of the land in each of those polygons. So we can start with the Alcott JPA, which is, you can kind of see on that map, is kind of bordered on one side by, I believe that's the city of Spokane, and then to the north, Spokane Valley. And it has a 47.4 acres of vacant land, roughly the same amount partially used. And then there are a few active plats in there that are developing in total at 4.78 units per acre. This results 277 units of housing and then 693 people. And then on each of these slides below the population capacity, I've just given the 2023 population for each of these UGA polygons.
Mr. Chairman, as Graham goes on, let me just remind the commissioners and our public, this slide deck and this information is posted on our web. So if someone wants to go back and look at this as we go through these pretty quickly, they can do that.
I know you wanted to move quick, but could I just ask one question? On the last slide, it looked like the population was greater than the capacity. Could you just explain that briefly?
Yes. So the current that 2023 population, that's the number of people that currently live there, and then the population capacity is it is the population that we've determined could exist on the land that is currently available.
Gotcha. That's in addition to.
In addition, yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Moving on to the 5 Mile UGA, as you can see, there is no partially used or platted land. It's very small and it's also mostly developed. There's only a population capacity for 20 people. 678 people already live there, and you can kind of see in the map that's just because it's pretty much a built out subdivision area. I don't know if I have the power to move on with this. Oh, I do. Okay. Just like that. Perfect. Next is Hilliard, which is kind of a unique UGA polygon. It has MDR is where you would see a lot of its residential capacity. And because it's MDR, it has a bit of a higher dwelling unit capacity and therefore a higher population capacity, even though its current population is not very high, but it's got a population capacity for 601 people, housing capacity for 401 people. And that's existing mostly in that MDR section in the north, and then a little bit there you can see in the south of the UGA polygon is also MDR. Yes. Yeah, the middle part of that is. Okay. No, I don't, not right now. That there would have to be a change in the zoning for there to be a. No, so the capacity that is assigned is a result of the vacant MDR zoning that's up there in the north, you can see, and then the MDR in the south. That's that orange color is where that residential capacity is coming from, not the light industrial.
Mr. Chairman, this is an example of one of the things that we will be studying between now and 26 is what makes sense out there. And it's part of it is the zoning itself, which we intend to bring forward to you recommendations that start to combine residential and business uses in the same zone with performance issues. So those distinctions go away. But also there are external externalities, the economists would say, on that MDR parcel is laying fallow for some number of years. Well, now you've got the connection to Bigelow Gulch Road, which is going to drive enormous pressure across that part of the valley. So will that parcel come back to life all by itself, or will it need something else? So those will be things we will be looking at. What Graham's talking about, again, back to Logan's question, these are data that are based on current zoning densities and current zoning capacities only. This is not a recommendation going forward. This is background findings.
I think the difference is that maybe the 220 permitted units were not built at the max capacity there, but I'm not sure of that, but I'm making some assumptions here. But maybe that piece could accommodated more than that, but the developer only chose to permit it at a certain level. And then some, I mean, and obviously it's not a huge piece, but that little tiny orange piece on the bottom, I gather you could squeeze some more in there. But yeah, I think that's probably where the discrepancy is.
If I could ask a question, so that 220 units, is that the result of, it's a hearing, is it, so? Okay.
Yeah. It's just,
Yeah.
we run into
And-
this, and this is an example that we deal with in a lot of places, and
If there's a plat that has been preliminarily approved or finalized, then that would be factored into these. But if it's not been approved yet, then that's probably the reason for the different. It is. Is that fairly recently, this past year?
We,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we will be again looking at all of these in more detail to refine this. I do want to because we could, if we turn each of these into a discussion piece, which we're asking for, we could also be here till 3 o'clock this afternoon. So, yes, but that's the point of this exercise, is to show you these UGA polygons, what's there now, what the math shows us, but also, as you pointed out, what are some of the limitations? And not all of that shows up here. You know, topography, there is a huge limitation on that slope. So anyway, we're going to give you kind of that 30,000 foot objective. And like you've brought up, any thoughts and questions, you know, we're recording, we will put those into our notes and we'll bring those back to you when we see you in January.
Is it oh, there we go. Next one is Indian Canyon. Again, no partial use or platted land here. 41 acres of vacant land, capacity for 321 people. Similar to Hilliard, this the population here is relatively low and has been low for the past 15 years or so, according to data that we got from OFM. Moran Glenrose, this is going to be one of the UGA polygons where we're going to see a lot of growth. We have a lot of growth capacity, and it's also currently where a fairly large share of our current unincorporated UGA population lives. There's 129 acres of vacant land, 12.3 acres of partially used land, and roughly around the same amount of platted land. Available, the capacity is 547 units, 1,290 people could potentially move here or not potentially move here, but we have the capacity to fit 1,290 people with our current zoning standards in the Moran Glenrose UGA. North Metro, this is where the most of the unincorporated UGA population lives, roughly 50%. You can see in that 2023 population figure, 32,000 people live in North Metro UGA. It's also where we do have a significant amount of vacant land, partially used land, and platted land, as you can see up there, which results in a fairly significant housing capacity and population capacity over the next 20 years. North Metro UGA JPA, which is just to the southeast of the North Metro UGA. As you can see in that, most of it is zoned light industrial. There are a few areas where we have some high density residential, and then that faded yellow color is a very kind of a unique zoning category, LDRP, which believe only permits 1 unit per acre lots. But a lot of the resulting vacant land and the housing capacity and population capacity is a result of those HDR, those areas of land that are high density residential. Pillar Rock UGA, this is similar to 5 Mile. It's pretty much one neighborhood. It's mostly built out. There's really only population capacity for a handful of people. And so there would not be a lot of expected build out here that hasn't already occurred. 7 Mile has quite a bit of partially used land, as you can see. This is because there's a lot of properties up there where it's, one house on a fairly large lot that the size of which historically we have seen can redevelop at higher densities, according to just data from past 10 years of short plats and long plats. This results in a fairly significant housing capacity and population capacity over the next 20 years. The Shawnee UGA JPA is very small, really not a lot of population capacity there. And then Upriver UGA has not a incredibly substantial amount of population or available land and capacity, but definitely not insignificant either. The Valley UGA, that's all of those colored polygons up that surround Spokane Valley. That's all the Valley UGA. That's where we have a significant amount of our unincorporated UGA land in general. It's also where we have the lion's share of our vacant land, partially used land, and platted land. And it's also where we have a fairly significant, pretty much second only to North Metro, 2023 population figure. And then finally, this is the figures for the West Plains. Significant amount of vacant land, a significant amount of partially used land, and a not insignificant amount of platted land, resulting in a housing capacity of almost 2,000 units and a population capacity of just over 4,500 people. And so that's kind of the end of those the land capacity analysis breakdown for each UGA polygon. This next slide is just showing just kind of current project status as well as remaining tasks for the land capacity analysis. So current project status is we've been exploring some alternatives for identifying partially used land. You actually saw in those figures kind of our most recent partial use land assumptions were applied there. And then we also, as Scott mentioned earlier, we looked at some of the potential nuance that may exist with population per household in the unincorporated UGA. Historically, it has been a little bit high, around 2.54 to 2.58 people per household. Right now, our assumptions are a little bit lower than that, but that's in anticipation of shrinking housing sizes over the next 20 years. And a lot of that is backed up by both local and national data. And then as well, one thing to keep in mind is we are also shepherding the land capacity analyses for the 5 small towns on the Palouse. It's Fairfield, Rockford, Latah, Spangle, and Waverly. And we have preliminary figures for them that we will be sending out for their review shortly. I've got those just kind of preliminary reports for them. And then the goal of those reports is to get feedback from those communities to say, hey, we think you need to make this, tweak this, do that, and start that dialogue with those communities. The remaining tasks that we have beyond those current project objectives, a final aerial review of the unincorporated UGA. So we have a map in progress for the unincorporated UGA that shows where each parcel that we've designated as vacant, partial use, or platted exists. And the goal will be to go through that one more time and see if there's any land where we believe the designation should be different. And all of this will then ultimately culminate in a draft report that we will have ready to present to the steering committee on January 15th. And with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker, Oh, it was me. I didn't realize the slide order got switched around. Yeah, so moving on to our climate change.
This is how we keep them on their toes.
Yeah. Works really well. So I'm also a running point on the climate change and resiliency element, and this will just be a fairly quick update on the requirements of the element, our progress so far, as well as just a brief update on our climate countywide planning policy status. So starting off with our the requirements for the element. So as of right now, the Spokane County Comprehensive Plan does not have a separate chapter for climate change and resiliency, and that's because it was only made a state requirement in 2023 by House Bill 1181. And the language for what is required of that element is now included in the Growth Management Act, and those requirements include goals and policies for two separate sub-elements, which is greenhouse gas emission reduction and climate change and resiliency. So we need to have goals and policies for both of those areas. It is important to note that the greenhouse gas emission reduction sub-element is only required for communities that have over 6,000 people. So some of the small towns that we are also for whom we are also working on this climate element with will not have to incorporate a greenhouse gas emission reduction sub-element. They will only have to do the climate change and resiliency sub-element. They'll only need to have content in their comprehensive plans related to that. The other thing to note is that for both of these sub-elements, there is a requirement to prioritize benefits for communities disproportionately impacted by climate hazards. The GMA uses the specific language of overburdened communities. So this could include unhoused populations, neighborhoods with less urban tree canopy coverage, people with chronic health conditions, et cetera, et cetera. Those are just a few examples, but it's the main thing to keep in mind is it's just when we look at what the climate hazards are that uniquely face Spokane County, who are the populations that are going to be uniquely affected by that. And so the climate change and resiliency element must have goals and policies that prioritize those groups.
I got a question here.
Yes.
I visited a lot of new developments in and out of the city and county. And it's painfully obvious when you look at a development that's newly done in the city, there's street trees everywhere. And you go across the street that's county and there are no street trees. I mean, zero. Is this something that we will address in what we're doing? That canopy?
Yes, Mr. Rayner, we will be addressing this. We have already received some comments pro and con on this, but this will be one of those elements that we wrap into that neighborhood plan or neighborhood zoning attribute that there are new benchmarks to creating a sense of place, a sense of community, quality of life that may not have been in the county's current zone. Partially that is in reflecting the fact that these areas are not likely to annex in the future, and therefore they'll be under county control. Therefore, property owners are not going to change in their jurisdictions. And the other is to try to work with the building community to demonstrate why some of these added upfront costs will pay dividends in a higher value product or some other attribute. But to be sure, we've had some negative comments on why are you adding extra costs to my project? So yes, but we will be considering that and bringing that both. We'll be discussing that with the home builders specifically and the others as we go forward. And then we'll be bringing you the results of that conversation and others later in the year. It is.
I just had one question going back to your previous slides. Basically, we have currently identified 23,000 spots for people in the UGA or the unincorporated UGA. And basically 20,000 of them are in the 3 different polygons. One's kind of misleading because it's the valley polygons that are all the outskirts of the valley, the North Metro and the West Plains. The vast majority of our additional units are going to go in those 3 places. That's fair to say, correct?
Those are the three places where we, with our current zoning regulations, currently have the most capacity. Yes.
Thanks.
So the next item I wanted to touch on and keep the planning commission updated on is we are currently working with the planning technical advisory committee, a subcommittee of that group, to create some climate countywide planning policies that will be included alongside countywide planning that will be included in our overall countywide planning policies. The purpose of creating this is basically just to have some language that reflects the new requirement for having those in our comprehensive plans, to have some sort of a countywide guidance for each community to include those in their comprehensive plans. So those were reviewed for the first time by the steering committee of elected officials in this past November. There were some revisions brought forth by not at that meeting, but prior to that meeting that they were included as comments at the steering committee of elected officials, and then they were incorporated into the document. And so that document with those comments taken into account will now be reviewed again by the steering committee of elected officials in January. Progress for the county specifically on our climate element right now, Cascadia Consulting is conducting a policy audit. So they are reviewing a lot of different policy documents, including our comprehensive plan, but also our hazard mitigation plan, as well as other community plans that have goals and policies related to the climate, to essentially get sort of a lay of the land of the types of goals and policies that are related to climate that the county has. We have a technical advisory committee, the Climate Policy Technical Advisory Committee, that meets monthly. The consultant, Cascadia Consulting, is in attendance for every other meeting. So are there to sort of guide the more technical elements of the climate discussion. And then we are also wanted to note we are closely coordinating with the city of Spokane through our consultant, because they are working for both they are working both with the county and the city to update and create our climate change and resiliency elements. And now with that, I believe the next topic of discussion is housing, and I'll hand it off to Tate, Andre, and Bongo Thompson.
Howdy. All right, I'll get cracking here. So there's a host of new requirements on housing. We kind of just did a couple of them here. Some new things will be required to do this time. We're going to be identifying the sufficient land capacity for our allocated housing needs, kind of what Graham already talked about. Planning for some of those middle housing requirements that Scott mentioned earlier. We're going to be taking a more thorough look at current programs and needed programs to meet our housing objectives, as well as documenting programs that may have had a racially discriminatory impact, and then, identifying 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, how we're going to try and undo those. So those are some of the new requirements we have here. I think we've gone over these before, so I don't want to spend too much time on them, but a bit of an update on the CPPs, separate from what Graham was talking about on the climate, but we wrote affordable housing CPPs, and they have gone before the steering committee a few times. There was some lingering discussion or disagreement on how specific language should be handled. So we're having a subcommittee of the steering committee look at this a week from today. And then we're hoping to get that finished into the books, or at least by the steering committee in January, and then by the board shortly thereafter. And then a bit of an update on the Housing for All planning tool. Y'all might remember this is the method A, method B, big spreadsheet thing. We'll have a slide on that in a moment here, but the methodology was adopted by the steering committee, so we're all ready to go there, and it's going to be adopted by the board, I think in January. Yeah, if memory serves. We did learn from the Department of Commerce shortly after that methodology was adopted but there's a couple things we can do with it. What we had been doing historically, and I'll just skip to the next slide to give you guys a visual while we do this. What we'd been doing historically was the numbers we plugged into the sheet were our population share. So I'm going to make up some numbers. So Spokane County, you're getting 25% of the growth. Boom, you put that in, and then you get the housing number. The Department of Commerce let us know that we have the option to, instead of using that population share, which is what you've seen before, we can use housing share, which is actually what's shown here. There'll be some tweaks when it gets to the final phase, but basically what that is instead of Spokane County, you're going to have 25% of it. We can look and say, well, our household size is actually this much different. So maybe it's 25% of the population, but 26% of the homes or whatever. It's very technical, so it's hard to get people super excited about it, right? But that's kind of the long and short of it. That's all I have for you on housing, very brief, but I am happy to take questions if there are any, or I can scoot it along to the next person.
Mr. Chairman.
Area median income. Area median income.
Mr. Chairman, one reminder, the numbers that are shown here are in some cases aspirational. The requirement from GMA is for each community to have development regulations that do not prohibit the ability of these units to be built in that community, meaning they are required to adjust their zoning or their development regs, if necessary, to allow for so many units of 30% to 50% area median income housing and that eligibility. This is not a forecast of units to be built. It is an allocation based on what GMA simply calls the fair share, that you should have some share of these as some remnant of either your housing stock or your population. And so it's important to realize this is not a mandate on building housing. It is a mandate to provide the opportunity for that housing to be built.
Does that mean that we need to provide for what we've been building for the last 80 years? A certain percentage need to be what the market wants, which is a 10,000 square foot, single family traditional home? I mean,
no, that's in a sense, if you're looking at that broad category at the very bottom, greater than 120% of the area median income, you can see a large share of that shows up in the unincorporated UGA and the rural areas, because that's where large lot development takes place. This is generally concerned with the 80% and under group that has been at least considered to be neglected by communities to providing those opportunities. Yeah.
Right. Seeing no more questions. Okay.
Thanks, Bongo.
Yep. I will scoot this along to Josh.
Thank you so much, Bongo, for that great presentation on our housing analysis. I'd just like to thank the commission and the public for giving us a great opportunity to present what we've been working on in the next year with transportation and what we will be working on. Currently, the transportation element is being done by Public Works in coordination with planning with me and Bongo. And I think one of the important things to note about transportation is that the transportation element is a 20-year vision of our transportation network and our transportation corridors. It's intimately coordinated and reliant on the land use element. We have to make sure that each of our corridors can support our future zoning and our future urban growth areas without compromising our level of service standards. We also have to prove that we have the financing in our 6-year TIP to meet those requirements as well. So that's what we're going to be working on within the next year and a half with Public Works. We've had some new changes / requirements from the state legislature for transportation. And one of the really big ones that we're actually trying to figure out right now and how this works is multimodal level of service. That includes level of service for bike and pedestrian, as well as trails and bus capacity as well. We're coordinating with the Washington State Department of Commerce and WashDOT for guidance on developing those multimodal level of service standards. The legislature also made a new change With revising the bike and pedestrian language within the mandatory elements for transportation, the RCW, to active transportation. So we're going to have to make some changes in language and policy analysis from bike and ped to active transportation. We have made some good progress so far within the transportation element. As you guys know, previously this year, you recommended to the board the adoption of the active transportation plan, which was made as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, which will be part of our 2026 planning. We've also created a technical advisory committee for transportation. The main objective of the transportation advisory committee will be a policy analysis going through our goals and policies and having the public as well as those different stakeholders and subject matters weigh in on this, but also look at the more technical aspect of it and the technical analysis that Public Works will be doing to ensure that it's being well vetted. And I just want to make sure that we understand that most of the work in the transportation element is contingent on the new land use map and the new zoning changes, as well as if we change urban growth areas. So that's when the majority of the work, when we'll be doing our forecasting and level of service analysis, will take place. I'm also working on the natural environment section with Tate Andre. The natural environment section encompasses our natural resource lands. That would be our agricultural, our forestry, but also our mineral land resources as well. We'll also be evaluating and redesignating our open space and wildlife corridor mapping. And by June 30th, 2027, the legislator has required us to update our critical areas ordinance. So the current progress that we've done is we have created our technical advisory committee as well. And in that, we will be looking at different best available science and different mapping designations for open space and wildlife corridors, as well as a review of the best available science that our consultant will be creating with our critical areas ordinance update. And as I've previously mentioned, we have hired Facet Consulting, and they will be doing a gap analysis and a best available science review of our critical areas ordinance, which we will have vetted through our technical advisory committee. One great tool that the Department of Natural Resources has actually provided us is an aggregate mineral resource mapping tool. As I've previously said, we have to use best available science when redesignating our land use and our resource land. So this is something that we could use as a tool for designating different mineral lands. So essentially they gave us a new map and they have identified what potential and what capacity does Spokane have for aggregate minerals. Aggregate minerals include different sands and rock and gravel minerals that we have within Spokane County. So that's something that we can use in the future. And I have that map on the next slide for you guys to look at. So what are we going to be doing over the next year? Well, one of the things we're going to start working on through our consultant and through our technical advisory committee is looking at best available science for open space and wildlife corridors. Our current one is rather old, so we're making sure that we're having new best available science updated. We're going to be looking at reviewing our natural resource lands designations, and then in coordination with Facet, they're going to be doing our goal and policy and development regulations review. And this will help inform our different rural and resource zones for reclassification. And here's some really interesting maps that I think could be beneficial for us to look at. On our left, we have the prime ag lands map. So currently, this is where we have the majority of our agricultural lands. As we can see, if we're in the Palouse area near our small towns on the right, we have a lot. That's where most of our prime agricultural lands in the county reside. On the left, near Turnbull, we have where most of our scab lands are. And the blue is where we have potential for prime ag lands if they're irrigated correctly. So this is kind of where we currently sit with that designation. On the right, this map was provided by the Department of Natural Resources. This shows where most of our mineral lands are. As you can see on the right, where the Palouse and where our prime ag lands are, that's not where most of our mineral lands are. We're going to see it on the western portion of the county and where that scab lands is, and mostly going throughout there. A lot of that is sand and gravel minerals. So that's what's going on, and that's what we've been provided. And these are tools that we can use when we do our future evaluations. And then lastly, I'm working on Tate Andre with rural lands. I think when we're talking about rural lands, what we have to realize is most important is that it's protecting the rural character, rural lifestyles, but also making sure that we protect the different critical areas and the agricultural lands and lifestyle in our rural lands. The GMA designates rural lands as lands that are not urban or used for natural resource development. And it's protecting the rural lifestyle, rural character, and realizing that's a different lifestyle and different levels of service that we would see in our urban areas. So what are expected changes? We're going to be updating goals and policies, updated development regulations, and review of our landmarks. Those are our limited areas of more intense rural development. And this will be done mostly by our consultant team with Facet, who will be conducting a review of our rural element and rewriting a lot of the goals and policies. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, we will move on. Next, I'd like to bring up Michael Ware, who will discuss our parks and open space element. Thank you.
Good morning, Planning Commission. My name is Michael Weir. I am in charge of the Parks and Open Space. Parks and Open Space is very similar to capital facilities, so a lot of the requirements, there is some overlap there. So we will ensure consistency with the capital facilities plan because it is kind of like a facility provider. We analyze it in a very similar way with like levels of service. So some of those requirements are like a 10-year demand assumptions, looking at the facility and service needs, tree canopy coverage inventory. So as we discussed earlier, looking at tree canopy, we'll have a good beginning with the inventory of it first. And then evaluating intergovernmental coordination opportunities. So see where we can work with other jurisdictions to provide that service. And a lot of the expected changes, we really look at it cumulatively when we're looking at capital facilities. So all of this will kind of be reviewed in that. And then in the progress and timeline, right now we're starting our coordination with the Parks Department. They have a new planner, Jonathan, who's going to be joining us, and then working with our consultant to begin that analyzing the parks, looking at the inventory, what's the current capacity. And then once we establish those population allocations, that's when a lot of these facility providers, purveyors, special districts can start to look at their levels of service and see if they are able to provide it within that level of service. And that is scheduled to happen in Q3 of 2025, along with the EIS work that we'll be doing. So a little bit more on capital facilities. A few of those requirements, that's inventory data. So that's looking at pipe size, condition, and age. Forecast of future needs. So identifying what future projects are going to be necessary to serve that future population. Location and capacity, where are those located and what's the current capacity of those? One would be like wastewater treatment plants. So if it's shared between jurisdictions, so we'll need some to work with those other jurisdictions as well. 6-year finance plan, as well as a 20-year finance plan, and then the reassessment requirement. So that reassessment requirement, we're really going to work on reinforcing that in this new plan and creating procedures to analyze that more. What that is looking at your level of service. When we do identify a deficiency, how do we address that deficiency? Is it changing the land use? Is it lowering the level of service? Or identifying improvements that we need to pay for to improve that level of service or reach that capacity? Some of those expected changes, when we look at capital facilities, periodic update's a great opportunity to look at this cumulatively. So we're going to reanalyze kind of everything, inventory data, recollect all of it, 6 and 20-year finance plan, level of service, and then reinforce those reassessment procedures. Progress and timeline. So coordination with the special districts, meeting with the water districts, meeting with schools, evaluating those levels of service is going to be a huge new step. Whether we change those levels of service or just kind of reevaluate those. In the EIS and development scenarios, those will be applied to the capital facilities. So when we pass around the EIS for review, that will provide the purveyors, special districts, the opportunity to comment and provide their answer on their capacity to serve with that growth. Any questions?
The question guy has a question. The ability to develop a piece of property is in a lot of ways relative to its size. And where I'm going with this is I think Scott made the comment that the flat land is gone. Well, there is some flat land left. A piece of flat land or buildable land that's sandy loam, whatever, that may be 1,000 acres has the capacity to self-fund the infrastructure it would need. A 5-acre site on the top of a hill might not. How does our planning process take into account land ownership financing as opposed to just public financing? In other words, is it possible that somebody that owns a section of land that's adjacent, or maybe it's urban reserve, that could afford to hook up with services, but the government doesn't want to? How does that fit into where we're going, or doesn't it?
It's a bit of a kind of a fair share analysis. So it depends on the impacts of that development. So they would have to be divided evenly. So if it's like a 5-acre parcel and the impacts of that, it has to be proportionate. So the identified projects that we come up with have to be proportionate to the size of that parcel. So a larger one might, you might have multiple developments that are smaller parcels or in acreage or size. Those would cumulatively all collect to share in a pool of providing that improvement. But current infrastructure that's kind of already there, or like a large plat, would be provided usually by the developer. But that's kind of where that 6-year and 20-year finance plan starts to kind of come in place. We're going to identify those projects. Some will be provided by a developer when they do develop that land. And then some others will be, if it's maintaining that level of service, it would be the county's responsibility. And I'll pass it back to Scott to kind of go over our work plan over the next quarters.
And just to follow up on that, capital facilities, as Michael has laid out, is a critical element for growth that the county has not linked to growth in their past comprehensive plans. That is why you're seeing such an emphasis on that, and why, these are good questions. And as Michael alluded to, and many of you know, developers on bigger projects do in fact pay for and install the infrastructure as part of their development services, and then it's dedicated to the public. And then the capital facility part on our side is, for example, water and sewer, or let's say sewer because that's directly related to the county. If it's a 1,000-acre subdivision or a 1,000-acre project, and that's going to have 4,000 homes, which is out of scale for us, to be sure, do we have the sufficient capacity to handle wastewater load for that size of a project? If not, then a version of a GFC is either involved, or we don't use impact fees here for those kind of projects, but that would have to be factored in, or the level of service would drop. If we drop the level of service by GMA, we have to either reduce the demand on that service, which would be cut the development project size, or we have to find a way of paying for the additional services that maintain the level of service. So there's, in a way, it's cut and dried on here's the benchmark. When you establish that level of service, what you're saying is we will meet this in some way. That will be a challenge for bigger projects, to be sure. Smaller ones, for the most part, will fit in. So we'll deal with that literally on a case-by-case basis as we go forward with those numbers on how much room do we need for new land. And so within that, we will be looking at that 20-year horizon for the GMA required UGA. But we will also be looking, as our predecessors did, is where's the next round of urban reserve? Where do we anticipate growing from 2046 to 2099, when somebody else will be standing here and making these presentations before all of you. And I'm sure some of you will still be here by then, but that's notwithstanding. Anyway, where we're going over these next few months, this is a very, very truncated summary of what's going to happen in the first 6 months or so of 2025. There's a lot here, and what you'll start to see in January is all of this expanded into that calendar that we talked about earlier. We'll be looking through, and the key elements of our work in 25 are to really nail down the GMA required elements so we understand them. We have analyzed them for growth. We've got those kind of in place. Then we can start doing this visioning, placemaking, scenario building, which is the qualitative aspect that we shared with you at our last meeting. And we'll be doing that, as we said, in that series of 9 meetings over the first 6 months here or so. The evaluations, that's behind the scenes, but it's also with the technical advisory committees. How's the outside world of experts giving us information we can use to help recommend public policy? In some ways, that's consistent with the way planning is done in Spokane County. The cities and others are always involved in neighborhood involvement, in consensus building and looking at that. We will be doing the same, but definitely looking at how does our investment community see us positioned for growth? What do we need to have that continued investment come in at an increasing rate so we can go past our OFM projections confidently and build, the quality of life that is really necessary here. Critical areas, land capacity, those are technical aspects that you will, especially land capacity, you'll start to hear more and more about. That is the single biggest issue to pretty much anybody that owns land or wants to develop land in the county. And then the EIS. The last environmental impact statement was done for the original 2001 plan, simply out of date. And this gives us a chance to look at those scenarios in a different way. And also, kind of a sidebar, it prepares the county for non-residential development, West Plains, North Meade area, to go through what's called a planned action part of EIS. Once the EIS is in place, we can then do essentially a SEPA on steroids to look at a business development area, consider all of the possibilities that are in there, create that planned action report, which is a little bit like a development master plan. But that means that as those projects are recruited for business, for job growth, they don't have to go through the individual SEPA evaluation and checklist because that's done ahead of time. It preps them for a much, much faster permitting process. So having an updated EIS gives us the opportunity to accelerate that marketing economic development strategy for the county. With that said, Mr. Chairman, we are done for today. Welcome to any broad questions or any other thoughts you may have.
I just want to say this was very informative and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you. We've been keeping our younger staff chained to their desks until they get this stuff done, very much, Ebenezer Scrooge style. Every one of them is a Cratchit, but they're doing great work.
I'd like to authorize pizza for these guys or something to keep them well fed. So next will be the staff report, or is
Yes.
that?
I do have a couple things for you. One is, I believe, good news. And that is that the Board of County Commissioners will be reappointing Logan and Lonnie to 4-year positions at their meeting on December 17th. And so they will be continuing their role with our Planning Commission and keeping the continuity alive for the next few years. So they, as you remember, especially some of you who are newer, all these terms were staggered as the commissioners went to the 5-member commission away from the 3-member commission. And so now as the reappointments are coming forward, all of the reappointments are in fact 4-year positions. So looking forward to continued participation by both of you. And logistics, Lori will be working with you and Eric from IT. IT will no longer be supporting the software that is being used for the laptops or the tablets that we issued you. So we're going to be going to another system. We are likely going to be considering one where you can use your own equipment, in which you're comfortable, but have your county email address and get access to at least the commissioner's folder that we have set up for you in our county network system. I don't know the precise details on that. She will be in touch with you between now and the January meeting. So we will be changing the way we get information to you to try to make it, again, easier and supported by the county. So, and
Should
Mr.
we take
Chairman,
our
I don't like that.
computers with us or leave them here or?
You can take them for now.
Okay.
Because if we're presuming there may still be some utility for them between now and January. But I would, I guess the advice is be prepared to bring in your equipment at the January meeting, and we'll either swap it or we'll have a different system in place. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would simply offer Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in January.
I noticed you have a tree at the top of the
Yes,
pretty
we-
generous of the county to put the tree on.
we thought that was very clever.
Nicely done, county.
Oh, I do have one more thing.
Yeah.
On your desk is a draft of a poster that we're contemplating using for our comp plan effort, something we will be getting around town. You know, this is of course very traditional. It's on paper. It'll be on a big poster board, but we will be putting this up in places and using it as like an intro to a facility if you come in, and then we'll be adapting that for other traditional uses as well. We still work on our visual.
It's
stuff.
not active now.
It will be very quickly, right after the first of the year.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. Next order of business. Thank you very much, Scott, for very comprehensive, informative discussion this morning. The workshop was just excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your participation, everybody.
Before us are the minutes of October the 17th, 2024. Hopefully everybody's read them, reviewed them. Are there any changes? If not, there's.
Yeah, I do have a couple changes.
Yes, sir.
Just a small typo under approval of the minutes, the second line.
Is this a new one?
There's going to be a correction.
Yes, it says Mr. Hossie moved to adopt. Just in the end of that one, it says motion carried 6. I think it should be 6-0 with an abstention from Mr. Pohl. Small thing, but, and then the only other thing I had is it should, under members present, it shows that Clyde arrived at 10:25 and that I arrived at 10:10. But I'm pretty sure we adjourned this meeting at 10:12. So I think that those are supposed to be 9:25 and 9:10. I'm not 100% positive of that because I've had a crazy last month, but I'm pretty sure that that's right.
You were late, but not that late.
Right.
Good.
And I don't think Clyde showed up after we'd adjourned, but I guess it's possible.
I'm just floating along.
Well,
Other than that, I don't have any other corrections.
how do we deal with these?
If you accept those as friendly amendments, you can adopt these as corrected or as amended, and we will make the changes. for
Other
your
than
signature.
I would go with the amended recommendation of Logan.
You'll automatically change those? I signed the last page. You'll put the right thing in there. Okay, that sounds great. Discussion.
I have another question. If we're
There's
moving
a
on.
motion on the
We have
floor.
let's have a motion to approve the minutes from October the 17th as amended.
So moved.
So moved by Clyde,
Second.
second by Pete. Without objection, so approved, adopted.
I have a question. I hope I missed Melissa here today, and I hope her health is good, and I hope she can be joining us. My thoughts are with her.
Thank you. Iris too.
Do we have any?
No.
Okay, Chair will take a motion to adjourn. So moved by Pete, second by Logan.
I'll second it. Sure.
Very good, Logan. All those favors signify by saying aye.
All right.
Opposed, nay. Thank you very much. It is 11:14.